also, of course, have the members of the Whale Ambassadors who were part of that team. I know some of you are here. And why don't you stand up? Because later when you have questions, these are the people you want to find. So it's Carol, you're here somewhere. Kristen, you're here somewhere. John. These are all the people who can answer questions about the exhibit. And of course, as Bill already said, John was the master behind actually creating what you see. You know, we just sort of said, well, can you do this and can you do that? And boom, that's what you have. I'd also like to recognize Bernardina Beach's support for right whales. This town does have passion and love for right whales. Now, I know of our commissioners, Denise, you're back there, you can wave, hey. I didn't know but I know everyone, Timm was with us last night, so we had a preview, so I just really know we have great support. The November has been dedicated as Right Whale Month. It was a proclamation of Right Whale Month for years now. I really have no idea how many. So really, thank you to all of Bernardina Beach. Let me say a little bit about the Whale Ambassadors, because it's a very new organization. So it's been around 5 years. 5 years ago, we made some cookies, whale tail cookies, and went out to the boat launches and met the boaters and said, hey, have a cookie. And while we're at it, do you know about right whales and have you ever seen one? That was great. You know, great cookies too. And from that, we grew into doing lots of other things. So what even you're just being here tonight is helping us. Here's the kind of stuff that we've done. We grew from 3 founding members and a handful of volunteers to 650 contact members and about 50 hardworking members. We have 1,700 participants in the education programs that we lead. So Scott, another woman, and I actually go out and teach in schools and churches and organizations. If you have an organization that would like us to come in and present, talk to Scott. Okay, we put marina signage from Amelia Island all the way down to Ponce Inlet, driving around. We're out there. We engage the public in various festivals, like the Right Whale Festival, like the tickets and things like that. In the Shrimp Festival, we marched a life-size right whale. I can now say an award-winning life-size right down Central Street there. We developed a retail outreach program, which helps fund what we do. Although I have to say, this exhibit took a lot more than that. And so we had some great support from downstairs, you probably see on the exhibit, much bigger than a school bus. So we can see them, and when they start doing things they don't ordinarily do, endangered species, something says, what's going on here? Again, you'll see more about all that downstairs. Another thing is whales in general are referred to as the farmers of the ocean. They spread nutrients from deep in the ocean to the surface, or from one place, then they swim, like swim from Canada to Florida, spreading nutrients. Farmers of the ocean. Whales play a very important role in that way. And hey, another reason that we should save them, frankly, is because we can. We have the means, and we're developing more. The question is, do we have the will? Well, again, you'll see more about that downstairs. And I'm sure Scott will talk a little bit about that. The last thing, well, I think at that point, last night we gave John a big thank you, but I'm not going to do that again. So I'll skip that part in my little script here. And Scott, why don't we now turn to what you'd like to share with us about the North Atlantic Right Whale. Scott Rowley is a member of our team. Thank you very much, Scott.
Thank you very much, Richard. Thank you very much as well for the introduction this evening. So, yes, we're going to talk about we're going to lead a conversation about the North Atlantic right whale, a very particular species. And the reason why it's important here is that this is the heart of the calving ground. This is where the whales come for their babies. And it's a unique aspect of Amelia Island and the waters of northern Florida that the whale migrates from the north down here for purposes of calving only. So it is a very unique species, and it's a very delightful aspect of being here on Amelia Island. So we're going to discuss about the North Atlantic right whale. I have a number of items I want to go over. We're going to talk a lot of science, anatomy, how we identify the right whales, why they are here, talk about their migration, what they eat, their importance to ocean ecology that Richard talked about, the farmers of the sea, and why 90 years after commercial whaling for right whales was outlawed, this species still remains critically endangered. 90 years later, close to 100 years later, they still haven't come back from the commercial whaling that was so important back in the 1600s, 1700s, 1800s. And then efforts to protect this species. So those are the topics which I'm going to talk about this evening. So let's start off with some science. Okay, so there are 93 known species of whales. Many are seen off or can be seen off the Florida waters, but most are not here. But I'm just going to divide this into two groups, two families, the toothed whales and the baleen whales. The toothed whales are like the sperm whales, or more particular, the orca whales. These are the whales that have teeth. They have a single blowhole. They tend to be smaller than the baleen whales, and you'll see a picture of that. And then the other family here, the suborder, would be the baleen whales. These are the filter feeders. These are the ones with the baleen, also known as whalebone corsets and so forth. These are the baleen whales, and there are four families of these pygmy right whales, which I don't know much about. The rorqual whales. This is a family of whales that you'll recognize. These are the ones with the pleated throats. And the way they eat is they engulf in a lot of water. Like a blue whale may take in 40,000 gallons of water and express it out and collecting the food that would be stuck to the baleen. And then you have the non-rorqual whales, such as the right whale family, and there are two groups here, the bowhead whales, which are mostly north of here. They're along the North Atlantic, under the ice. I'll mention that a little bit, or up next to the ice. And then you have the right whale family. And there are three right whale species. We have the North Atlantic right whale, which is the one we're going to talk about, but there's also a southern right whale all through the southern oceans, South Africa, Australia, South America. And then you have the North Pacific right whale, which is extremely endangered species. I don't know how many of those whales exist still. So anyway, so we have the baleen whales and the toothed whales, and we're working our way down to the North Atlantic right whale. So right whales are the third largest of the great, or commonly seen great whales. Bowhead whale might be a little bit larger than the right whale, but for this picture here, it shows you the relative sizes. The blue whale is the largest mammal on Earth, and can be upwards of 100, 110 feet long, and weigh 100 tons. You have finback whales, and then you have the right whale here, and then the orca killer whale down here. So you see that these are very large animals. The right whale is a particular size and shape. You can see they're very round, they're very low tongue. They have a lot of blubber, about a foot thick of blubber on their bodies. There are some other aspects of this whale that we'll come to in a second here. They are large, average 40, 50 feet long. They weigh up to about 70 tons, 120 pounds, 120,000 pounds, 130,000, 150,000, in that range. The calves, when they're born, are about 14 feet long. And in the whale exhibit on the floor that's a life-size depiction of a calf. We couldn't fit a right whale in the building here. So you have the calf down there. The calf, when it's born, weighs about a ton. And I think they gain weight about 75 pounds a day with their nursing. Adult whales now average, unfortunately, about 3 feet shorter than their historical averages. So this is probably a result of stress and food shortages and so forth. You compare the North Atlantic right whale to the South Atlantic right whale, the southern right whale, and the right whales up here tend to be a little bit shorter, and they don't have as much blubber. They don't have a nice fat roll that you start seeing in the southern right whales. Baleen, you can see about 10 feet long. So the whalebone, the strands of whalebone, there are a couple hundred of these that extend downwards from the upper jaw. And the whale's eye is here, and we'll talk about the callosities here that identify the right whale. Oops. Go back here. So these are difficult to see. Has anybody seen a right whale off our shore here? We got a time share.
Neptune Beach.
Neptune Beach, yeah. They're difficult to see, and especially down here. The reason why they're mostly black. So unless you have good conditions, they're going to be black. They're going to be submerged mostly in the sea. They do have some white patches on their head. They might have some white patches on their abdomen. If you start seeing white on their tails or on their flippers, that's most likely scar tissue from entanglements or boat strikes. So you don't see white except here and here on these whales. They have a very broad body size, so this makes it very difficult for the boaters to see them. They're very low in the water. They're very wide, I shall say. They do not have a dorsal fin.
Yeah.
So like the other whales all have dorsal fins. This is the one whale that does not have a dorsal fin. So it's interesting to see the millipede. The millipede was off the shore last week here. Dolphins were swimming around her also, and you can see their dorsal fins coming up and around, but she does not have a dorsal fin. And down here, they're inactive. There is no food down here for the right whales. They feed up in the feeding grounds off in New England, the maritime provinces of Canada. They come down here, and there is no food for them. So it's not like they're going to be chasing food. They're going to be nursing their calves. They're going to stay close to the surface, and they're going to avoid predators. And we don't know why the right whales come down here for calving. It might be because of the water temperatures. The calves are born without that big layer of blubber. It may also be because there are fewer predators down here. The orca whales, for example, will be further north. A phenomenon that I've learned about down here is that great white sharks also migrate down here this time of year. So maybe they're coming down here as predators, and it's the mother's tail that is protecting these whale calves from predation. But why they migrate down here, we don't know. But they don't want to attract predators, so they're not calling, they're not splashing, they're not breaching. The mothers are just very inactive, so it makes it, again, very hard for them to see, very hard for the boaters to see them. So this is a nice slide. Again, where is the whale? People have seen this slide before, you know the answer. But okay, there's a whale there. Okay, doesn't show up much above the surface of the water with this particular picture. You can see where, especially if you have any chop on the water or sun glare, you're not going to see that if you're cruising along at 40, 50 knots in a recreational boater. There are 3 whales.
Wow.
And so that's, that makes it very difficult when we start talking about how do we protect these whales from extinction. One of the causes of whale death is vessel strikes. And so how do we prevent that if they're hard to see? So how do we identify a right whale? I mentioned that the baleen whales have 2 blowholes. The toothed whales have only 1. But the blowholes on a right whale are spaced apart and they're angled so that when the whale blows, you're going to see a V-shaped spout. If you're at the right angle, you'll see the V-shape. And that is an identification of a right whale as opposed to a single spout. They have white callosities on their head, which are a unique fingerprint. Callosities are bony projections on the head of the whale. And they have whale ice on them, which gives it the white appearance. I have this thing of whale ice. These are not insects, these are crustaceans. So we do call them whale lice. So they have white callosities, and each of those patterns are unique. So they serve as a fingerprint for the whale. And so we can identify whales up in the feeding grounds and see the whale down here. You can identify that same whale through photography. Paddle-shaped flippers. People are familiar with the humpback whales. Also, the Latin term I'm not going to attempt to pronounce, but the translation is the winged New Englander. They have those long fins like wings that you see coming out of the water. But these are very short paddle-shaped flippers, mostly dark skin. We've talked about the patches. They have a very smooth tail, unlike the humpback whales, with a deep notch, and again, no dorsal fin. So these are how you identify these whales. And callosity patterns, you can see different callosity patterns. This is Aphrodite and Batman and Porcia. The North Atlantic Right Whale Foundation Consortium gets together every fall and names whales. Usually because the pattern of the callosity reminds them of something, or their scarring. There's a whale called the Accordion that has scarring from boat strike, the propeller strike up her back. Now, copepods are the primary food for right whales. So these are zooplankton. They're about the size of a grain of rice. And the right whale will go through the water, filtering these things with its belly, and they will eat about a ton of these a day. So a lot of these things to maintain their blubber, build their strength, and be able to have the babies that we expect them to have down here. One of the neat things about these copepods, you notice that they have some red pigment in them. And that red pigment can be identified now with satellite imagery, so that the scientists can go and start saying, okay, there are fields or pockets, families, whatever, groups of copepods here in the Bay of Fundy. Or we find them over here. We find them up in the St. Lawrence Seaway. We can identify where these groups of copepods are, and we can expect that that is probably where the right whales will be seen. Because a lot of what I'm going to show you is historical data. We know that the whales come down here and congregate off the shores of Amelia Island for their calving purposes. But what if they change and we don't know it? They might change their patterns for some other reason, or more importantly, I was going off a side tangent there. More importantly, the copepods might shift. And so where we might be protecting whales in a particular area, their food goes to another area, they follow along with it, and now they're in an area that's no longer protected. And I will show you an example of that. So anyway, so copepods are their primary food. Developing science as these populations can be identified from space, we might be able to do a better job of protecting the right whales from vessel strikes by identifying where they might be going to, as opposed to where they were 5 years ago. Richard mentioned the whale pump. Whales feed throughout the water column. The right whales have been found with mud and seaweed in their baleen, indicating that they feed at the bottom of the water column, but they can also be just skimming the water top, getting the copepods. So they feed throughout the water column, but whales can only poop at the top of the water. They can't poop down below. And so nutrients, as Richard called it, feed the phytoplankton. Phytoplankton are extremely important. One of the statistics here is that the ocean phytoplankton produce about 50% of the Earth's oxygen. 40–50% will come from the land-based plants. The other will come from the ocean-based plants. So the phytoplankton are very important to the maintenance of our ecology. The zooplankton will feed off the phytoplankton. These are the animal plankton, if you will, opposed to the plant plankton. Then on to krill to fish, and all of us are dipping into these at various points, whether we're catching fish or shrimp or larger fish. This pump continues on, and when whales die and sink to the bottom of the ocean, they also feed a lot of other creatures that are down on the bottom. So this is called the whale pump. And one of the controversies is, okay, whales might eat fish. The right whale doesn't, the orcas will, and some of the humpbacks will, and so forth. Are they competing with our commercial fishermen, and will we be better off without the whales? And there's a correlation. Now, correlations are not proof of causation, but there's a correlation that the healthier the whale population, the healthier the fish population is as well. And so that these animals appear to be important to the ocean ecology, and it's important that they be protected, that we maintain the ocean ecology, including all the different species that are in there. Now, I mentioned that they migrate. The foraging is off the coast of New England. This is Massachusetts, Cape Cod here. This is the St. Lawrence Seaway, Bay of Fundy. And these are the feeding grounds. These are where the copepods are located. And the baleen whales will be in these areas where they find their food. And the pregnant females and a number of non-pregnant females, and some of the guys, for reasons we don't understand, migrate down here to the waters off the coast of Amelia Island here for their calving purposes. Now, other whales migrate. Humpback whale migrates. They have their calves off the West Indian Islands. The bowhead whales that are up in the North Atlantic do not migrate. But the right whales do migrate. They migrate right along the coast. Now, one of the statistics I've heard is that half the population in the United States lives within 50 miles of the sea. So you got Boston and New York and Baltimore and Washington down to Jacksonville, Miami. We have large populations along the sea coast, and this is right where the right whales are coming down also. So the impact of human activities is going to be very great on them, as opposed to the pelagic ocean-going whales that would be much further out in the ocean. This is a statistic from Defenders of Wildlife, a slide showing, again, where whale observations are. This is by month. So these colors up here, March, April, May, June, July, these are the feeding grounds. And here, December, January, February, are the calving grounds. You can see that these are where whales have been spotted during their migration. Now, whales can be seen from shore here. The picture, I think this is, Richard, this is one of your pictures, I think, here. And you can see that there is a right whale here. This is Halo, is the name of this particular whale, named after a Colossi pattern with a ring around her blowhole. So she's called Halo. And you can see a calf tail here. And you see how close this whale is to the shore. There's a fishing pole. So somebody was out there fishing. And Florida Wildlife Commission can manage to take drones out and take pictures, and you can see Halo and her calf there. Last week, we were visited by millipede. So it was it Wednesday that millipede was here? Thursday?
Sounds about right.
Friday, okay. Millipede was here on Friday. And spent several hours off of the beaches here. Estimate she was probably heading south at about a quarter mile an hour. So for hours she was visible from the beach, probably about a mile offshore. And you see her and her calf, and you got a picture by Richard. Not here, but very entertaining were all the dolphins that were flying around her as well. But so anyway, so these whales can be seen in close to shore. So let's talk, I'm going to pull in a little English here. My wife always cringes when I do this. So anybody here read Moby Dick? A few people did. Very difficult reading. I read it this summer for the first time and just like, oh my God. This is a very difficult read. But it's an interesting book because you have the story of Ahab versus the white sperm whale that going at each other. but every other chapter was information about commercial whaling. So how do you set up a boat? How do you find your crew? Where do you go? How do you harpoon a whale? How do you kill a whale? How do you fence a whale? How do you get the oil off the whale? How do you protect what you just harvested from all the sharks in the water that are now taking chunks out of that dead whale? So it's an interesting book. Well, chapter 105 of this book, they talked 100 years ago about the fact that commercial whaling may make these whales go extinct. So he says that, another quote reminds, the more, I guess, educated Nantucketers, whether the whales can long endure so wide a chase and so remorseless a havoc, all this killing, would not be extinguished from the water. Now, he came to the conclusion that no, it won't happen, that the whales have ways of being protected. And here's where it gets a little confusing, because he said these whales can go up under the, next to the ice of the Arctic Ocean and not be caught up there. But the right whales don't go up there. The bowheads do. So he's getting confused between a couple of the different species at that time. And he said, we don't think they're going to go extinct. We can continue doing the commercial whaling. But commercial whaling, it dates back now about 1,400 years. It started about the year 1000, the Bay of Biscay, the Basque fishermen. Back then, because the right whales, and there was a eastern Atlantic population of right whales that came down to the Europe shores, and they could spot these whales from shore, like we do here, sail out, capture the whale, bring it back to shore, and then collect the whale oil. And that was the start of commercial whaling. And the whale oil provided the major source of lamp oil in the 1600s, 1700s, 1800s. This is what lit Paris, and this is what lit London streets during those times. And the problem was that as we were killing the whales off, it became harder and harder to find the whale oil, and harder and harder to find the whale oil, and the price of whale oil kept going up. And so commercial whaling did decimate the whale populations, and for right and bowhead whales outlawed in 1935. The International Whaling Commission was formed in 1946. All commercial whaling, with exceptions, was banned in 1986, and then a couple other things that are particular to the United States, the Marine Mammal Protection Act of 1972 and the Endangered Species Act of 1973, all which are intended to protect marine mammals, including the critically endangered right whale. How many whales were there before there was commercial whaling? And these numbers are very loose, but it felt that this one author thought there were maybe about 240,000 humpback whales in the North Atlantic, and now they're estimated about 25,000, so about 10%. A little bit better for the fin whales, that's about 20%, if I'm doing the math correctly. But the North Atlantic right whale, maybe 10 or 20,000 existed in the North Atlantic, and we're down to 0.5%, it's less than 1% of these whales, and they just have not recovered from the commercial whaling. And the question is why not? I didn't, on the other slide I forgot to mention is that oil was discovered in Pennsylvania, and there was a shift from the whale oil lamps to kerosene lamps. It's much cheaper, much easier to get a hold of. And the whales, of course, back, this is very true, in 1861, were celebrating the discovery of oil. So now, at risk of extinction, and one of the statistics I've heard said, I don't know the science behind this, is that they could go extinct in the next 10 or 15 years if we don't do something about this. They're critically endangered. Current estimate is 384 plus or minus 10. We have only about 70 breeding females. The calving intervals from calf to calf has increased, so the females aren't having as many calves as you would like them to have to repopulate. There are really fewer than 20 calves per year is what we're averaging right now. The feeling is that we really need about 50 calves a year to maintain a healthy stock. So that's the breeding side of it. On the other side of it, whales are not living as long as they used to live, so or should be able to live. And the death and injury are man-made causes: entanglement, vessel strikes, and other stresses to the male population, such as including food scarcity, ocean noise, etc. So this is a difficult slide, but let me work you through it. Okay? We've already said that the primary threats to the whale are fishing gear entanglements and vessel strikes. Okay. We already talked about the fact that they migrate, foraging up here, calving down here, and go back and forth along the shore of the eastern United States. This slide here shows the estimated deaths per year. You can see about 30, these are births. Deaths here, 10, 15 or so deaths, and documented births, 20, 30, down to 10. 2018, no births were documented. But what shows here is we're going along with a fairly stable level of deaths, and the number of whales were increasing up almost to 500 back in 2011, and then you see that this plummeted. We lost over 130 whales over a few year period of time. And you can see that the number of deaths increased, especially in 2017, a high number of deaths. And this was because the copepod population shifted. It went from the Bay of Fundy up to the St. Lawrence Seaway. The whales chased them up there, and the whales did not have protection from vessel strikes. And we'll talk a little about seasonal management areas. The response Canada did place in seasonal management areas. Keep that term in mind. 2008, NOAA had previously established seasonal management areas to try to protect these whales in U.S. waters. But anyway, so you can see that in starting about 2015, 16, 17, there were much higher numbers of deaths than expected, and it's called an unusual mortality event, with a lot of response by our governments, both Canada and the United States, to try to protect these whales and bring this back down. And it looks like maybe the deaths are down to where historically they have been. Still too many, but it's not going to extinction the way this was going. So let's talk about births. Mentioned about 70 calving females. So this particular slide is when there were 372 estimated individuals. Less than half the whales are females. 157 females by this count. And out of this, we have some females that are too young to calve. They don't calve until about 10 or 14 years old. That's when they become sexually mature. You have other female whales that have recently calved, and their calving cycle is a minimum of 3 years. A year to be pregnant, a year to nurse, and a year to regain your strength or fat, your blubber. So they're out of the breeding pool until another year or two later. So that leaves us just these female whales that are known breeders here. So not a lot. There are a number of female whales here that are of breeding age but have not had babies yet. And why is that the case? And it may be because of stresses, lack of adequate nutrition. Are we taking good care of the oceans? Ocean noise, interaction with humans, injuries from vessel strikes or from entanglements. They just put an incredible amount of stress on the whale that is going to, they're not going to be able to successfully breed. We can do things about this. We probably can't do much about adequate nutrition. Ocean noise, I guess we can do something about, but the idea is that whatever we can do to help these calving females would be great, but there's not a lot of calves being born. We have, by the way, 7 calves this year so far.
Yes.
That's early. Last year we had 11. The year before we had 20. But we're already at 7 this year. Fingers crossed. So the other side of things is that right whales are dying. And if you look at the southern right whale, the median lifespan of this whale is probably about 75 years. Half the whales will live longer than that. Bowhead whales, 150, 200 years, similar species. There have been bowhead whales who have died, and they do a necropsy on this, and they find a harpoon tip. When was the last time harpoons were used? Over 100 years ago. And they find that bowhead whales certainly can live a very long time. By corollary, we believe that the northern right whales should be able to live to 130 years. But you can see the life expectancy, the median, half the whales are dead by the time they're 25 years old. Okay, so this, if we can't get the breeding higher, we certainly would try to reduce the number of deaths. Now, the leading cause of death and injury is entanglement in fishing gear. And the item here is the vertical ropes that are in the water that the whales can get entangled in. So they're skimming the water when they're bailing out, and they just get caught in the ropes, the vertical ropes that the fishermen are using, and they'll twist and turn, and then the rope will be totally entangled in it. So that is one of the major causes of death. And there's a neat little video of this disentanglement here, where they were able to disentangle this whale that had come down, drag this crab pot from Canada, 120, 135 pounds. They were a little bit surprised when they disentangled the whale and found this heavy thing on the end of the rope, and that's what they pulled up. But you can see the YouTube video. It's a fascinating video to watch how they disentangle the whale. But disentanglement is not the answer. It's not like we should put more money and put more boats out there to disentangle these whales. And there's a reason why, is these are difficult animals. There have been attempts to sedate the whales, give them anesthesia. They won't be as dangerous to be around. But there have been people killed when a whale tail just got agitated and came down on the top of the boat and killed somebody trying to disentangle them. The ropes may be embedded into the flesh of the whale. You may not be able to reach them to cut them. And the rope tangles may be difficult to undo with just one or two cuts. And when they see a whale entangled like this, which is off the coast of Cumberland Island about 2 or 3 weeks ago now, the scientists will look and say, well, if I cut here, or if I cut here, then we feel that the whale will be able to disentangle itself. And so they might leave this long trailing line, because the long trailing line, the pull on that line will pull the rest of the line out of the whale's mouth from the baleen. So they analyze where they want to make the cuts. They get in there close, and they do the cuts they can. This is a partial disentanglement. Richard, do you know if the whale has been spotted?
No, I have not heard. No.
Yeah. And again, the quantities, they know which whale this is. They can see this from the aerial surveys. So how do we reduce line entanglements? Well, people know about lobster traps or crab pots on the bottom with a buoy going up to the surface. You have another trap, you have another buoy. You have another trap, you have another buoy. The idea is to try to reduce those number of vertical lines, and there are a lot of regulations now that are being put into place. This is a mock-up of a vertical line, and I can tell you that this is a Massachusetts boat because it's a red marker. It's more than 3 miles offshore in international water, national waters. It's got a green marker there. It's got a weak link, 1,700 pounds. This will break. I can't pull that far. And some other aspects of it, they prefer, though there's not rules, they use splices instead of knots, so that you're less likely to get this caught in the baleen. So there are rules like that. That tells you at least where the whale is becoming entangled. Another is that if you're going to put more than one trap down on what is called a trawl, and trawls can be up to 1.25 miles long. So you start a trawl here and be up to Baptist Church on 8th Street. That you have a minimum of 45, not a maximum, minimum 45 traps on your trawl. And so if they have 45 vertical ropes, you have 2, one on each end of their trawl. So the fishermen are under a lot of regulations to try to reduce the entanglement. But the developing technology, which really is here, it just has to be adopted, is what we call on-call lobster buoys. And you have an example downstairs in the display that will rest on the ocean floor. The fisherman comes along, releases the buoy up with the vertical line now, and then they can pull in their trawl, they can clap their traps down, they can reload the on-call buoy, put it back down the ocean floor, and now you have no vertical ropes. Preventing collisions at sea and avoid, difficult. There is no way of putting an easy pass or a sun pass on these whales. It just doesn't work. They tried, and they ended up with a lot of abscesses and just putting these whales at risk. So the only way you can prevent collisions is see and avoid. And so you see something like this, limitations like vessel design. That captain cannot see whales within the first couple of miles in front of the ship, and he wouldn't be able to turn fast anyways. Recreational boaters can also kill whales. It's not just the commercial. And they can be cruising along at 40, 50 knots. If there is limitations to sea type, such as rain, fog, snow, or sea conditions, vessel strikes are very likely to happen. What steps are being taken for that? International Whaling Commission International Maritime Association. They got together and are working to reduce vessel strikes. This are an example of shipping channels in the Bay of Fundy. Southbound ships, northbound ships, and some separation between the two to keep them from colliding into each other. And you can see that a population of right whales historically be found here, and the southbound lanes were going right through that. So the International Maritime Association said, let's shift the lanes. Just move them over and try to avoid places where the whales have been. And so there's a lot of that being done around the world as they find whale populations next to shipping lanes, see if we can move the shipping lanes. The other thing that they're doing is seasonal management areas. These are temporary or permanent areas. We compare them to the go slow zones outside of schools. When the kids are there, you go slow. And when the kids aren't there, you still go slow, but you can go faster. And you can see there are seasonal management areas off the feeding grounds here, Cape Cod Bay. They're January, March, April. And then seasonal management areas that are down through the coast here. And our seasonal management area here, right off the coast of Amelia Island, is active from November 15th to April 15th. So commercial vessels are required to go 10 knots or less because if they're going faster and they hit a whale, then those whales will die. And they've been established in 2008 in U.S. and then in Canadian waters in 2017 in response to the copepods going to the Bay of the St. Lawrence Seaway and the whales chasing them up there. How do we know the whales are out there? A lot of different groups are very active in tracking these whales. There will be daily flights going offshore here. They go out 30 miles, go up 3 miles, come back 30 miles, and do this grid work, looking for whales, checking whale health, monitoring whale calving. That's how we know that there's 7 whales calves out there, doing research and a variety of different funding. Now, whether this funding will be here a year from now, don't know. That's an issue for us. So if we want to prevent extinction, where do we reduce mortality, change the fishing practices, reduce or eliminate the vertical lines, use our speed reduction areas. There may be emerging technology, the on-demand trap buoys, of course, satellite surveillance, be able to see where the copepods are, because they weren't known to be up in the St. Lawrence Seaway until we killed 130 whales. Satellite surveillance might be helpful. Sonar buoys, be able to detect the sounds of the right whale against the background of all the other ocean noises and be able to track the whales. And again, there is a lot of interest in getting shipboard detection devices out there. So the key messages, these whales are important to us. Not just that we have a soft spot in our heart for them. They are important to the marine ecology. They are critically endangered. We have the privilege of being in their calving grounds, and you can see them off the shores. It's very nice. Hard to detect. We know that the major causes of death and injury are the entanglement and vessel strike, human causes, and that we can reduce the mortality by reducing boat speeds and trying to reduce the vertical rows in the water. I'll take questions at this time, and Richard will take questions also.
All right, so it's a warm room. We've had some wine. We've had a lot of information. I don't see. Oh, Isabel's here. When do you want us to go downstairs?
Whenever you're ready.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Well, we'll take a few questions and then we'll head on downstairs. Yes.
Do the male of the species migrate as well?
Well, as Scott mentioned, some of them do, and we haven't any idea why they would come down here. But yes, what was the number? Last year we said there were 11 calves, so that means there were 11 moms, and I think the number was like 86 unique whales were down in the southeast.
There were 2 of the female whales that went around into the Gulf of Mexico and off towards Pensacola for reasons we don't know. They were non-pregnant females. The 2 of them just took a trip.
I was wondering, I may have missed this, you said something about noise, but what kind of noise is adverse to them?
Well, really, it's all.
Can they hear the engines of a
Sure.
boat and maybe avoid that?
No, they aren't detecting in general that we're introducing in the ocean is making it difficult for whales in general. I mean, think about it. We're all here tightly packed in the room, and we control this like a community. Whales can be miles apart and still be talking with each other. You know, if you're a humpback whale and you find a nice pad of fish, you go, hey, everybody, fish, here. You know, they can talk to each other miles and miles and miles apart. And if you have all sorts of other noise, in the pandemic, when the pandemic happened, the humpbacks, again, research off of Seattle showed they were able to actually move farther apart. So they're working like this, well, I'm going to assume that they were able to spread out, talk with each other, because they had more distance and less noise. Yeah, thanks, Rowley.
Well, they were named the right whale because it was the right whale to hunt, which I'm guessing was for the oil that you talked about.
Mm-hmm.
What else did they get out of the right whales?
The other reason why is, one, they're very slow moving.
Yeah.
You know, so if I mean a crew team, a varsity crew team can get up to about 12 miles an hour. A right whale goes about 6. Some of the other whales can be up to 20 or 30 miles an hour. You know, so you get out there and you put your whale boats down in the ocean and you start rowing after them. You're going to say goodbye to them. So they're slow. They're close to shore. So we're not talking about going 2 years off to do whale hunting. You could do it in a day trip. And they float when you kill them. And so you don't want to go through all this work of hunting the whale, harpooning the whale, and then have it sink to the ocean. And until they learned how to inflate the bodies of some of the whales, they were not commercially valuable to the whalers. They have to, because they'd kill them and they would just sink.
Mm-hmm. And your question was, what else did you harvest from a whale? And baleen would be the next thing. And you'll see more examples of that down in the exhibit. Yes, there we go.
So you were talking about funding, and it may or may not be available. What are the reasons for that? And what kind of lobbying is being done, and what kind of support can be offered from it?
So, you know, the funding for like the aerial surveys, that's coming from NOAA and elsewhere. And of course, we know in the current environment, some of that funding isn't as available as it was. So that might put a limitation on the ability to continue the aerial surveys. I would say that's really important to continue. So what can be done? Of course, definitely writing all of our representatives, keeping focus on that, keeping the focus on any changes being made to the Marine Mammal Protection Act and things like that. Yeah, those are the things that we would have to do. Absolutely. Thank you. In the back. Tom, yes, hey.
Yes, Richard. What are their predators?
You know, there really are an apex species. There aren't. The calves may, and there's really no known, I talked to FWC about this, there's really no known examples of the great white sharks attacking the calves. I'm not saying they wouldn't if they don't have an opportunity, but if you have this 52-foot mound and a lot of dolphins hanging around, I'll go find a different fish. So yeah, generally it's an apex species.
Now, typically the calf is not more than one body length away from the mother.
Absolutely not.
Yeah, they are
So
always close by.
Is there a difference between the female and the male whale and personality-wise? Is one more aggressive or is one?
Not that I've ever seen any reading. The females tend to be a little bit larger than the males in terms of body size. But in terms of aggressiveness, I've not heard anything about that.
Is there any greater acceptance by the commercial fishing community for these new tactics you've been talking about in terms of how they like fish?
Well, I can't say. Let me answer this. Neither one of us are really deep in the commercial fishing community. What I've heard is they just follow the rules. Sure, you tell us that we have to go this slow, well then we go that slow.
The money. Follow the money.
Follow the money. Well, that's true as well. But there's
commercial outfit, a wholesaler that would buy, we'll call them whale-safe lobsters. You know, that were trapped using the on-demand buoys. The on-demand buoys can be borrowed. There's a lending library of gear up in Maine where the fishermen can borrow this stuff and go and test it. The states of both the United States and the Canadian provinces have set up areas where if you want to fish this particular area, you have to use on-demand gear. So it gives you an incentive to go there. But what you don't have is a wholesaler to buy your lobster. So it just goes into the pot with everybody else. It would be nice to have a wholesaler that would say, okay, I'm going to distribute whale-safe lobster, and then be able to go to your stores here, your Teeter, Harris Teeter and so forth, and say, I want whale-safe lobster, and then follow the money, as you were saying, follow the dollars. That would happen. In terms of, you know, the AIS,
station keeper.
yeah, I mean, again, we're trying to use technology. Now, that's the entanglement side of things. The vessel strike side of things, there's something called automated identification systems that all the commercial boats that are in U.S. waters are required to have. That every 6 seconds it broadcasts who they are, where they're going, and there are data collators. I mean, this stuff is being put out into the airways, and you can get a receiver and collate that data for free. It's out there. And so there are data collator companies. Motion Info is one of them. And what they're doing is they're putting up receivers up along the East Coast here. We have one at Amelia Seaside Inn. Phyllis and I saw one at Sapelo Island, and we were up in Maine and saw one at the Bloom Island Lighthouse. And they're putting them up and down the East Coast. And what they're going to do is receive the broadcast of vessels that are going into a protected area and be able to, with the computers and so forth, shoot a message back to that ship and say, you are in a protected area. You are now required to go no more than 10 knots. And they have a very effective response to that. It's like 90% effectiveness of the ship captain slowing down. So that's one of the technologies that's being used.
Yes.
How about some form of tagging, with some kind of a beacon on the whale itself?
Great question. It's another one question that we do get. And no, they have not been successful in tagging right whales for a whole lot of reasons. We actually, many of us attended an entire presentation on this. So, in short, again, they don't have a dorsal fin. Usually tags are attached to a dorsal fin. Prior times when they did tag the whales, the tag had to be so deeply embedded in the whale that you risked injury to the whale. Because these whales, when they get together, they're very tactile. They kind of roll around on each other, that sort of thing, that rip the tag off. So for right whales, there's a whole lot of reasons. I mean, tags only transmit information when the tag is above water. So that's only going to work for a little. It just goes on and on and on.
I didn't realize that. So there's no kind of thing that works like a sonar signal too.
No. Really wish there. Another plug about downstairs, I'll say, you'll see there's a QR code that you can scan, and it'll take you to frequently asked questions. That's probably the first one. And if you have other questions, fill out the little card that's down there, and we'll send you the answer, but as well, we'll probably post that answer on the frequently asked questions. I think with that, I'd like to invite us to go downstairs.
All right, it's 7 p.m. now.